Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning back into Let's Play Chroma Squad. I'm your host, the Ronin of Dreams, and in today's episode, we're not only taking a little bit of a step out of tutorial land in terms of ramping difficulty, but also taking a look at the Enlarge Your Sword vote and a discussion on stats and skills. But before we get there, there was actually an announcement recently made by Behold Studios. The same day my last video went up on YouTube, they made an announcement on Steam about their mobile and console versions of Chroma Squad being released. More importantly, those versions have various features that are not in the base game yet, but those features will be coming to PC in a future Director's Cut edition. Now, we're not sure if that's going to be paid DLC or if that's going to be a free release, but until that drops, I'm going to be conducting business as normal. When it drops, however, I will cover any differences as I find them to try and keep this LP as accurate as possible for you, the viewer, in case you're playing along. That said, we're going to get a look at Season 1, Episode 3 today, which is going to be very nice with the new gear we're getting, because, hey, we're starting with the Enlarge Your Sword vote. Now, most of the emails of this variety that offer an opportunity give you some sort of flavor if you don't go with it, and some sort of reward if you do go with it. And that's in terms of what the good option and bad option are. That may not be the first and second options, respectively. In this case, we get a nice little bonus of not costing nearly as much money, and a new item, namely the Enlarged Sword, as well as a commentary from Shishimaru. Now, if we went with the refusal, we'd get a nice little flavor bit alongside a very mocking of standard, you're not a part of this email circle, can't unsubscribe list. Instead, we get a level 3 weapon. Now, level 3 is roughly equivalent to Season 3, and I say roughly because it's more like Season 2.5 gear with the stats it's provided. We're also taking a quick moment to do a little bit of extra equipment management, but it gives me a chance to start talking about stats. In this game, there are about 8 listed stats on characters because of the addition of weapon attack, for instance. And of those stats, gear at this moment is just focusing on those baseline stats. You're not going to see anything get too terribly crazy. And for that matter, movement is a stat that gets very difficult to manipulate, and we'll get to that in another episode later in the season. So I'm going to talk about the 7 most volatile stats in the game. You can look at them from a standpoint of offensive, defensive, and utility stats, or I like just prefer referencing them as offensive and defensive. Of those, we're going to start talking about the defensive first, because health is kind of your mainline mitigation stat. Without health, you do not live, and there are not ways in this game to become completely immune to every attack. So you're going to need health at some point, why not get it early? A lot of shop gear is always going to be predisposed toward health as their defensive stat. And it's very useful when you're coming up against monsters like our boss monster for today's episode, which is going to be in a new location for us, but it's a location we visit repeatedly. Now, as with most episodes this early in the game, we do get a very common or foreseeable situation. We have a high-value stunt actor who doesn't care for their costumes, and instead is wearing a barrel with plastic swords in it. I could mention about people's tastes, but in this case I think it says everything. This guy has a decided pirate motif, and currently is agreeing to changing in order to use the teleport effect. But I think we all can see where this one is about to lead. Nominally, this episode starts bringing the difficulty up a little bit because of introducing a new enemy type, as well as the boss mechanics being something that we don't have a lot of means of manipulating. You will see exactly what I mean as soon as he does it for the first time. Just keep in mind that the episode name is called Barrel and Roll. That should give you enough. Of course, he also picks the very original name of Barrel Man, but we see a couple of Falco rejects on the field, and that's the new enemy type for this episode. So, again, a little bit of tutorial land, but at least the boss is somewhat of a threat. And the defeat boss monster with the finishing move is the hardest part of this episode. Just saying that up front. In any case, we have the Weak Bread Crumbler. They focus on being a little bit more dodgy than their typical companion monsters, but their biggest trick is they pack a pistol and will shoot you. It's considered a basic attack, though, not an attack that's based off of a skill, unlike weapon attacks from our characters who have pistols or bows. And that's going to get important later. In any case, while we start dealing with some of these mooks, I'm going to go back to the stat discussion. Now, dodge is your second primary defensive stat. If you can dodge, you don't take damage from dodgeable attacks, which is most basic attacks, and the occasional special attack. In fact, I looked through some very early change logs and realized that I made a slight mistake on my bestiary entry on Boxing Box. The stunning blow is not a passive, but rather he has a super punch ability that does the stun, and that is explicitly dodgeable. Also, remember when I said movement mechanics can be a thing? When you transform, you move to whoever transforms you. It's a great way of pulling everybody back and forcing more minions up closer without giving them all the opportunity to attack. It doesn't work on our new bread crumblers because they're ranged, but it's still something that's useful. Moving on, the third stat I consider defensive because you have to be willing to be attacked is counter. Now, counter can easily be talked about as a utility stat instead, and for some people, I can understand that. But since you have to be attacked to trigger it, well, that means you have to position yourself that you would need a defense. Now, you can counter any move that doesn't knock you back and keeps you in melee range. That's important because sometimes knockback will prevent you from countering even if you would normally counter that skill. Moving on to the offensive stats, most of them are also fairly obvious. Your attack sets up your attack range. Now, damage ranges in this game appear to be about 5 to 10% off of your attack stat, plus or minus, so there's a little bit of a variable range there. But it also will be influenced by an enemy's defensive stat. We never get to see those in the game. So, meanwhile, speaking of dodge, 12% chance, and he does it. And it's annoying because they go and be cowards throughout the entire game. And there's the barrel roll, which includes a high rate of knockback, so you can see where I say this guy is annoying pretty quickly. The weapon attack stats almost come exclusively on weapons. I've never seen that special property drop for anything other than your weapon itself. And they determine the attack damage range of your weapon skill. The upside of weapon skills is I have never seen them miss from a character. That's not saying they can't, but as far as I'm aware, they're not programmed to, which is very useful in this game. Because preventing dodgy characters, and we get more enemies that are much more dodgy than these guys, it's a good way of getting rid of them off the field in the lowest amount of effort. The third stat is critical, and we've seen a couple criticals, including the lead throwing a critical hit onto our boss monster of the day, and they deal about somewhere between 150 and 200% damage. I'm not sure on the formula because the formula is, again, not released to players, but it makes a good bit of difference when you crit when you want to. Now, when you crit and you don't want to, such as a critical counter blow, it gets annoying. The last offensive stat in the game, or at least I consider it so, is skill regen, because of the way skills work in this game. Skill regen influences your skill cooldowns. Every skill has a set skill cooldown value. Divide that by skill regen, and you get the minimum number of turns that it will take for that skill to come off of cooldown. It gets a little variable because there's some fuzzy logic. So if you had 4.3 as your resultant number from skill cooldown divided by skill regen, then that 0.3 plays into whether or not it's going to be 4 turns or 5. And there's, I think, a useful way of checking that out, but I'm not entirely sure, and yet again, I haven't been able to code dive the game. But skills are so important because they don't miss, and the majority of skills in this game are offensive skills. Even the assist, who appears to have defensive and utility-oriented skills, has means of being offensive with them. And putting a good weapon attack bow on an assist, means if you're not healing, you can still put out decent damage while not putting anything into the attack stat. And I find that useful. Now, the boss monsters being evasive and annoying, and the roll is really tough to deal with this early in the game. Thankfully, it hasn't knocked me back much, and he finally put himself in a position for me to use one of the few utility skills we have access to right now, that of Eagle Lasso. So, I'm about to set up for the team finisher. Now, if you're ignoring the audience direction, which you could, if you take a look at my audience bar, very easily, you could very easily wind up ignoring it. But I want to try and do them all the time, and this is one of those times where enemy movement mechanics and our lack of certain skills from later seasons make this difficult. But finally, together we are invincible, for we are the one, the only, the Disaster Rangers! Yeah, that's a thing. And with this nice, quite stylish finishing move, we not only finish the boss and the episode, we get to see that we deal a lot of damage with finishing moves. Weapon finishing moves do even more, and hopefully I'll show off next time. But I'm not stopping here with the materials and audience wrap-up, because we have 3 new emails, one of which has dire consequences for us and our future. First off, we get, folks who call us what we are, and if that changes every episode, and it probably will, might be a gimmick that hopefully the fans enjoy. In any case, I said we had 3 emails. The first one is just from our uncle. Yeah, this is more of those little flavor bits that, we don't even have to respond to them. But notice we have marketing and an old friend. Marketing is the new studio mechanic. I'm going to save talking about that in depth next episode, but free marketing is an obvious yes. So we go ahead and take that because, hey, free money is free money. But here's the dire consequences. Dr. Soap is contacting us because he's willing to go to court with us because he feels we are ripping him off entirely. So we have 3 different options that the thread can choose from. That said, folks, I look forward to seeing you next time with the vote on how we're going to deal with Dr. Soap, which is our Season 1 meta-arc plot twist. Oh no! And we'll get a couple of those throughout the game that will slightly change how each season plays from playthrough to playthrough. That said, I hope you enjoyed the episode today, and I hope to see you again soon. Thanks for joining me. Stay frosty out there.